Hi and welcome to School Shorts with me, Melissa Chan Green, journalist and mum of two with an interest in education. And for those of you parents and teachers and educators who are also interested in that area, you're probably already familiar with the term gifted. It sometimes comes with the assumption that a child is just going to breeze through school, but it can overlook some other challenges that come with it, especially if a student is twice exceptional, or 2E as Rhonda Filmer calls it. Rhonda is the author of a book called Neurodiversity and the Twice Exceptional Student. And in this episode, she talks about this little-known condition that can affect quite a reasonable amount of students. Rhonda, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm really interested in this topic especially, and it's a topic I think a lot of parents probably aren't that aware of. But before I ask you what 2E or twice exceptional is, can I just ask how you got into this field, how you came to know more about it?
Yes, I had so many. Yes, thank you, Melissa, for having me on. It's just a lovely pleasure. I had a job as gifted and talented coordinator at a large independent school here in Sydney, and I had so many kids that the teachers would say, look, he's smart, but he's not doing any good. He's failing maths, he's doing this, doing... I had so many, and so many of the parents would ring me and say, what are you going to do for him? I honestly only had a certain amount that I knew, and so I thought it built to the point where I thought to myself, I'm just going to print a business card and I'm going to actually go home into my study. And that's what I did for 20 years. I had families and I did homeschooling of some of these kids when things got really bad and they needed some little bit of time out. I lectured, I talked to people, I learned an enormous amount. I went to Sykes and said, tell me how this works with this is the reading on the WISC-5. Explained to me, and I learned so much that I just thought I have to write a book about this because I want to retire. Still haven't managed to retire.
Well, it sounds like you're doing very important work, so hard to give that up.
It is impossible, actually.
I want to follow up on some of the things you said there, but probably best if we start at what is 2E or what does twice exceptional
It's an interesting term because it's not clinical. It's actually descriptive, and it's one I came to because I didn't like the term gifted learning disabled. I hated that term. It seemed to be a barrier, but it means a child who is gifted or has high potential in one or more of the domains of human ability. So it could be intellectual, creative, social, emotional and physical, or any of those or combination, and then at least one coexisting disability in the area of like a specific learning disability like dyslexia or something like that, or an emotional, physical or neurodevelopmental disorder. And that kind of neurodevelopmental disorder would be the ADHD or ASD, autism. So they've got a whole lot of interesting stuff going on in the one child.
Yeah. Do we know what proportion of students this might relate to?
Yes. Well, I did a very interesting straw poll so that I could indicate that in the book. The short answer is roundabout. I found by collecting information that was not intended for this purpose, like from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and from places like Autism Australia and so forth, I collected what they said about those disorders, and then I applied the 10% rule that we use here to say 10% of all kids will be gifted. So, on top of that, so it's very, very spurious in terms of trying to demonstrate research, but I put it in there to say it's at least 3% of kids. And one of our researchers, Michelle Ronxley-Pavia, claims that it could be up to 7%, and I've seen her say even more, 7%. So these are kids who just are misunderstood. They're counterintuitive and they're missed because they speak well. Usually they've got oral precocity. Often they'll just be seen as lazy, disinterested, disrespectful, can't be bothered, this kind of thing.
That's right. Quite interesting numbers, because if you think in big schools where they might have 100 children in a year group, you're looking at potentially a handful, 3 to 7 in that year group who may be twice exceptional. And even in smaller schools, if say you cut that into half, you've probably likely got one in each year group.
It's 8.2% of all kids have ADHD. I think it's going to be higher when they keep testing it. It looks to be quite high to me. Autism is about 1 in 70. So you'll have these disorders, and particularly anxiety disorders, which since the pandemic appear to have increased enormously in prevalence. You add that, and then you put the giftedness on top. You've got a lot of complexity in our student population. So this information that I'm putting out is for teachers to know to apply in whatever part works for the children that they're observing.
What do you class as gifted, Rhonda? How do you know if a child is gifted?
Well, they'll be in the top 10% of the population in terms of their achievement. In their potential. So it would be measured really with a standardised test like a WISC-5 or a Woodcock-Johnson IQ test. That's for intellectual giftedness, and at least 10. Right. And then, of course, we've got degrees of it. So the children, they would be the moderately gifted. And then we've got some kids have got IQs 2 and 3 standard deviations above the norm. So they'd be 145, that kind of thing. They're very, very clever.
And is that something that's genetic? Are gifted students just born with that skill?
They would be. And they're not necessarily from families that have got high success.
I guess the thing with these children who are gifted is that on first reflection, you would look at them and go, well, they seem to be excelling. Mm-hmm. And then is it quite hard to miss those areas where they might not be thriving, where they might be having the challenges or some learning differences?
Yes. And what I keep saying to all the teachers that I ever speak with, take time to observe. Look at these kids. Who better than you to be able to say, okay, this fits with this, but that doesn't fit. These kids will have this, they don't fit together, all the circumstances. Often they can't translate their oral precocity, their vocabulary into written form very well through either a concentration issue, an accumulation of lack of skills. If they've got ADHD or ASD, they've often got poor sequential thinking, so they actually can't I'll do this step first, that step second, that step third. So they start with it with gusto and fizzle out after the third or fourth line, when they're little kids. They're not even motivated sometimes because of these underlying accumulated poor skills that are coming from the way their brains operate, that can't even give them an interest topic and teachers will say, oh, that should work. Give them an interest topic. They know everything that is to know about steam trains. But you give them the opportunity, but they still fizzle out on that because the skills underlying are so poor.
It seems to me like it's a group of children too, where if you really aren't working with them and identifying what they need, they have enormous potential but could get incredibly bored or just fall out of love with learning in school.
Absolutely. And that's been the story of all the families that I worked with. The children were they'll often have, as part of their profile, they'll have slow processing speed or a poor working memory that has to be assisted. You have to work with them on how do we get the best out of this child. We can use all sorts of executive function inputs and how to, as a teacher, to build your toolkit on how to help these kids access the work and be able to perform. They only need to taste success. All humans just need to taste success and feel like they're self-efficacious. I can do this. I now have the skills to do it. So if you're not inputting in that regard, the children will fail. And you also need to remediate, because to me, the biggest issue in school, what we're really there for, is to build literacy and numeracy as the basis of them moving forward into high school, into their lives. So they can't access literacy curriculum and really learn how to say, unless you modify and adjust the curriculum for them. And I'm trying to give, in the book and in the talks I'm giving, teachers confidence to know that they can work that out because the research is there. We know what to do. We know we need explicit teaching. We know we need phonics instruction in a synthetic, structured way, more so for these children than even the average kids, because some kids will pick things up regardless, but these children don't really. Not so it translates into high achievement.
You mentioned executive function, and I think that that's probably a topic for an entire episode at some point, because it is really huge, isn't it? And relevant to so many different learners. Can you just give us a quick summary of what you would say executive function is?
Executive function skills are it's an umbrella term which sort of covers the mental processes that serve like a supervisory role in our thinking and behaviour. So it's our capacity to direct and coordinate our efforts toward a goal. So that would be a definition by Foster and Cooper-Kahn. It is a whole ballgame. You need to actually look at the three major topics are working memory and cognitive flexibility, so being able to move from one thing to another, and the speed at which you can do that. You've got to work with things the best way you can. So it occurs with all conditions of ADHD. Every person with ADHD will have executive function disability to some degree or another, and each individual person is unique.
So this could show up as having difficulty moving from one task to another,
Yes.
or transitioning from a task to an unexpected task, or even kind of planning out your time management. Those are kind of examples.
Time management is crucial. Like, most of them will have that, like some degree of it. And I've recently read in the paper that there's been a spate of adults being diagnosed with ADHD because they actually realised during the pandemic that they couldn't, once the structures of their daily work life were removed, they couldn't manage themselves. They couldn't get things done. So I think a person with ADHD who manages working from home has probably built in some really good structures. They probably fit in a gym session or a run or something like that puts structure into their day.
Yeah, interesting. Again, I think that's another whole topic. When we talk about twice exceptional students, can you give an example, say, of a student who might be gifted with dyslexia or gifted with ADHD, and what are some of the challenges they may have? Because it's going to be different for all students, but if you can just give an example, so if parents or teachers are listening, they might go, okay, I think I can identify a student or a child that potentially you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, if I was thinking of a child who actually has ADHD and dyslexia of some, specific learning disability of some kind, perhaps a difficulty learning to read, or maybe even more so once they do learn to read eventually, a problem of dysgraphia, being able to plan and execute a writing function. I can think of many, many, many students who I've thought, now that child in kindergarten might look disinterested in learning their sounds. They might, they may not actually be able to remember them very well, particularly vowels. So they need constant input on that. All children can learn to read. It's just that they'll take longer than the other children in the class and look disinterested. So particularly if it's combined with ADHD, because they've got this dual issue of them being distracted by the sound of the bird scratching at the window, or somebody clicking a pencil, or some other child in a class of 30 who's doing something off task, which will always be the case. And there's an accumulated effect that the sounds are taking longer to get working into the memory, and then they're not concentrating when the sessions are on. They're coming in and out of application. I'll be with you, and then they're not. You can't even tell. You can't even see in the eyes whether they're with you or not.
Yeah. I think we can think of a lot of children who this would be, that are an example of this. But I guess that's the tricky thing, though, because all children might seem like that at certain times. So I guess you need to know that that's consistent difficulty, right?
And I think we referred to it as, in New Zealand, talking about at the Spell conference, talking about the toolkit, building the toolkit so that you actually know about these things. You're not diagnosing every second child who's taking a while to get going, because there are many, many, many reasons why some children don't pick up reading as quickly as others. They could simply be in a home that's sad. They could be refugees who are still traumatised. There could be anything going on. But we know that if it persists and all other things are clear, that there could be a learning difficulty. So we don't rush into diagnosing, but what we actually do is act as if the child does have the diagnosis, does have a disability, and make sure they're getting plenty of input. So we call that, response to intervention. If that's not sticking with the first inputs and the rest, and keeping up with the rest of the class, we would do a tier 2 intervention with a small group. And so you would give more of the same in different ways and give opportunities for the child to personally demonstrate what they know.
I've heard someone say before that, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, you don't have to know that it's definitely a duck to start treating it like a duck. Is that kind of what you're saying? That, if they need to be treated as though they are a duck, treat them like, I don't know why I'm using a duck.
That's absolutely true. We would call that imputed disability. We may say, we think this is happening, and then after a while we may not have the finance or the school counsellor time to actually spend time diagnosing, but we will treat this child as if there's a disability going on, and we will make sure that child reads before the end of year 2. I think this has been our big problem. We just let these kids slip through the cracks, and then they'll never feel good about themselves. Now, there are a lot of kids who are twice exceptional who learn to read very quickly. Do you know, it's not everybody. It's just the combination of ADHD and specific learning difficulties in particular can causes a slowness to learn to read, or picks up the reading but maybe slow in some other form, like the written expression.
Do you think we are under or over-diagnosing children?
Oh, totally underdiagnosing the 2 E's. Definitely, because there's this inclination when you're not trained, and there is no standardised training. Very few teachers that I've spoken to have ever had any input on it. There are more courses now at the universities in the teacher courses than there were, but they're still only reaching a very small proportion. But there's always a capacity in humanity to blame the victim if you don't understand. And the inner world of to say, come on, you're just being lazy, that kind of thing. But there's also something else going on with a lot of these children, that they're actually, say for instance, there are elements of autism in the child, that child has a different perceptual world going on. There are high sensitivities, there are all sorts of things that are causing that child to perceive the world differently. And we've never had an understanding of that. It's taken me a very long time to understand what that can mean. We've got meltdowns occurring and all these sort of behavioural things that get in the way. And oftentimes they're horrendous at home. And at school, they're particularly girls are masking and doing reasonable amounts of looking okay, but the learning's affected one way or another.
How do you feel about the fact that most people won't even know what 2E is?
Well, that's why I can't retire. I just keep telling me, that's why I wrote the book. I thought, I want this book to be a comprehensive resource that teachers can read now, and then they've got a background for all the research that's coming, so they can input that into what we already know. Teacher education has never included mandated work on gifted. It doesn't. It's certainly 2E. I went out in the teaching world not having a clue about disabilities, mind you, and as I say in the book, what made me really write it was to realise that so much of the research, it takes on an average of 17 years to make it through to the teaching world.
Yeah.
And so
that's crazy, isn't it? That's one student's whole time in those primary, intermediate, high school years.
You'll get schools now that are, under resourced totally. Nobody's doing any of this.
Rhonda, clearly there are challenges for teachers, and we've kind of talked about the need to be armed with this information. As parents, we're the greatest advocate for our kids, right? So what should parents be doing if they suspect that their child might be 2E?
Well, I mean, parents are in different positions of being able to do, a lot with professionals. But if it's possible, the first thing they need to do is give clear expectations and boundaries on their kids as toddlers. These children who are emotionally dysregulated, and that's a lot of them as toddlers, can be really hard work with tantrums and meltdowns and all this sort of thing. I have found in the 20 years I was doing my consultancy that it was the families who had created clear boundaries on the children's behaviour, very clear expectations that were easier to manage. So in some of these households, the child is the centre of the household, running around, everyone trying to please the child to keep them happy. Don't get into that position. Put boundaries on it. Stick with what you think is fair and reasonable. And then professionals seek the help of perhaps a child paediatrician first up, and talk to them, child psychologist, about the behaviour and so forth, and start to get some understanding. Read whatever you can. There are so many, there's a lot of advice out there through websites like Raising Kids, Maggie Dent's work. There's work on, there's the understood.com, American piece that's very helpful, so forth. Then, if you've got your child in a condition where they actually do as you ask over time and they learn how to, then the child is teachable. The education of the child is dependent on them being teachable. Because we have to work out what...
It's hard for families, isn't it, Rhonda? Because often students will hold it all together at school and then let it out in their safe place at home.
I've got all these processes written in my book about you really need to listen to the parents, because the parents are doing it tough. They know their child. I've never met even an unhappy parent who was angry with the school, never met a parent in 45 years of teaching that didn't have a good understanding of what was happening for their child to a degree. Then they need the help that they need to get. And I'm not being difficult saying they need to control what the children are doing, but if they can, that's going to help, because then when they go to school and as we unfold the story, it should be a partnership between the school. If we haven't got diagnoses, let the school can listen to the parents, talk to them about it, and get to the point where there's a shared understanding amongst all stakeholders.
Rhonda, can you tell me more about your book, what it's called, where people can get it, and just who you think it's going to benefit?
Well, I think every teacher should have a copy. It's called...
Funny you should say that.
Well, it was written as a handbook for them. So it's Neurodiversity and the Twice Exceptional Student, a comprehensive resource for teachers. And it's available through Routledge, Taylor Francis and Amazon and everyone. There's an e-book. I think the e-book's particularly useful for teachers because you can click on the bit you want. You can pull down, copy, take it to staff meetings, that sort of thing. The thing I love most about the response to the book is that my colleagues that I really respect, who I've known and developed wonderful relationships through my life, love it. So I can't ask more. That's all I can do. And I'm speaking everywhere I possibly can to try and disseminate the understanding I have and the approach we should take.
And then maybe, Rhonda, once you've done your speaking, you might one day be able to retire. Who knows? The dream could still be alive.
I keep every time I meet a teacher, I say, would you like me to give you an hour's professional learning, free, no fee? And I go, no, this is just a passion that I just...
Yeah. Well, you must have seen a difference in children that you've worked with, have you? That must be what's driving you, is it?
Totally. Every single case study in the book is a real child, and I've got a part at the end where they've given their voice to the story and explained to teachers. Some of these kids went through terrible times, and they're just amazing. They're just successful. These are the ones that I still keep in touch with after 15 years, whatever else. Yes, I could tell some stories of brilliant achievement because they were bright and they were misunderstood. And once the understanding came, they took wings and off they went.
Well, you must feel very proud about working in that area, and thank you for not retiring on behalf of all of those children, but your day will come. Rhonda, thank you so much for being with me. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If that topic was helpful for you and you'd like to hear more, please do like and subscribe. It sends me that feedback. School Shorts is all about supporting busy parents who want their children to thrive. Follow on social at SchoolShortsNZ for fun ideas, helpful resources, and exclusive giveaways.